Hello, Sandy. Welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Simon. This is a humble privilege. Thank you.
Well, look, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing more about your story. Now, I know that we are going to have a little bit of a chat about a business and a family business that you exited, which I believe is Ag Venture Feed and Seed. Maybe just to sort of help the audience get an understanding of who you are, maybe you could just sort of give us the Sandy story leading up to that and how you kind of got into that business in the first place.
Yeah, so I will. I think everyone has, when they become middle age or whatever, they have a story that's long. So I will try to keep this as succinct as possible. So I took over my late husband's company in 2003 at the age of 30. We were married for 15 months and he passed away of complications of leukemia, of cancer. And at the time, I was not involved. So that is how I came into owning an agribusiness company. We owned it together on paper. We had new debt. And his thought was if something happened to him, that we would sell the company and be done. And circumstances didn't turn out that way. So fast forward to now, I thought I would keep it for at least 6 months or a year, and then I'd be able to sell. And what I realized when I got there was that due to the fact that we had just bought out his partner, our debt load was really putting a cramp on our financials. And when our company isn't in good financial standing, it's really difficult to sell a company. And so I thought, well, I'll just figure it out and turn it around and then sell it. And finally, 18 years later, in December of 2020, I did end up selling to a vendor partner.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your husband. It's obviously not the way most people want to end up in business, right? It's that must have been extraordinarily difficult to deal with that personally, as well as deal with the challenges of the business.
Yes, in many ways and in many regards. First, I was 30 at the time, so I was pretty green on even getting established in business. I had leadership roles prior to that, but none in the agribusiness space. And also, we just went through the funeral and people were looking to me of, what are you going to do with his company? And actually, it was a sales rep that told some of our customers, well, Sandy's going to be taking it over. And I remember hearing that, and he's like, by the way, this is what I'm telling customers. And I'm like, oh, I guess I can do that. And so thankfully, we never know what we're in for. And I surely probably wouldn't have said yes had I known what was ahead of me. However, I kind of did feel trapped. I think we are always at choice with the circumstances we're presented. At the time, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I felt like if I don't run this business, I will be stuck with, in this, it was 20 years ago. So it was about $500,000 in debt. So it would be about 2 million now. And that was a lot for a 30-year-old to try to figure out how to pay off. So I thought, well, maybe if I can fix the company. We had great employees and great customers. So it's one of those things when you have little to lose, you're willing to try quite a bit.
Yeah. I really relate to that whole idea of, sometimes having the blinkers on, sometimes ignorance is bliss. I've done a number of ventures in my life where I've thought to myself in hindsight, if I knew what was involved, I might not have done it. But very glad that I did do it and get through it, and sense of accomplishment and all that sort of good stuff. So the reward was good, but it just, whether it be financial or otherwise, but it just, I think, I think that's it's an interesting part of entrepreneurialism and that kind of business journey.
Yes, absolutely. And the first few years obviously were really tumultuous and a lot of chaos. However, we had the support of amazing employees, amazing customers, many good community members that were willing to step up and help. And then people that believed in us. And we also had our share of attackers that wanted to see us go down or steal our business or whatever. So and after we got through that period of time and I kind of got my footing a little bit, we had many good years, and that's why I stayed. It was a passion area for us. It was a legacy company, and we did a lot together. And I miss that people and community part quite a bit, even now, a year and a half later after selling.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing around legacy. I'd love to unpack that with you in a little bit. It's so just to give some context here, I guess certainly for an international audience. So this is your business, or you're based in and around Minnesota, is that right?
Yes, Minnesota, so the Midwest part of the U.S. Yes. I mean, we're a regional company, so worked with a lot of farms in our area and had a retail business where kind of how I grew up on a farm is that you'd go into town with your pickup and buy some bags of feed. We had that side too of the retail, smaller farm side.
Yeah, cool. And so you took over this business. Can you give us a sense of the size of the business when you first took over, maybe in terms of turnover, employees, just a bit of a sense of how big it was?
Yeah, so I believe we had 2 full-time employees then and 2 or 3 part-time. However, the model that we always had, and we stuck to it, was even back 20 years ago, we were doing more of the contract economy, which is very common now, obviously. We had vendor partners and we had contract type people, marketing, things like that weren't on our payroll, that we would work with as needed instead of having them on our payroll, because we couldn't afford it, number one, nor did we need them to be on our payroll. So I didn't really know that's what we were really doing, but we were kind of in that gig economy model before it became popular. So
yeah, you're ahead of the times. Yeah. And so out of interest, what was the actual kind of business model? Can you give us a bit of insight into what were you selling? Did you have to have a lot of stock? Was it just a high level for the uninitiated?
Yes. So we had a retail space where farmers and hobby farmers and community members would come in and buy bags of feed. So we had a warehouse that had different kinds of animal feed where you could pick up 10 bags or 1 bag or however many. And so that was the retail small farm or hobby size of farm. And that was neat. And that's where our offices were. And a lot of our business was done out on our farms, where we would deliver larger quantities of feed in big semi trucks and so on. And we would be basically the local retailer or local dealer of different brands of companies' feed. And so we'd work with the farmer, and we'd actually partner with our vendors to do the nutrition work to make sure animals were fed exactly what they should be.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was it a stock intense? Like, did you have to carry a lot of inventory and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So it was a little of both. We carried bags, like when you buy a dog food bag or a cat food bag or a rabbit feed, whatever it was. So we had a warehouse full of the bagged product. However, a lot of our feed went out in bulk, like in massive dumps of, tons of feed that would get augured into a bin on a farm location. So that was the majority of our business, but we did have quite a bit of, like the walk-in business and the feed side too. So yes, it was kind of a yes and. So we had some inventory, and then we had a lot of ship as you purchase. So
yeah, cool.
So we never carried it in stock at our retail location.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And so you've kind of taken over this business in 2003. How long did you ultimately run the company for before you eventually exited?
18 years. So
wow.
My thought was I'll fix it and sell it in 6 months or a year. That was the utopian, yes, blissful vision. And obviously some factors were present that we needed to fix. It's not so easy to sell a company that's struggling financially, obviously. And nor did we want to. We had new debt, and it just seemed insurmountable at the time. And so actually, it was about a year and a half later where we turned from our red numbers to black numbers, from being severely in trouble to being at least a little bit profitable. So kudos to the team for some hard work in there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, did you have any kind of business coach or support, people who weren't in the business necessarily, but they're advising and helping you out?
Great question, Simon. I wish I would have had a business coach, which is, that's the other side of my life. Actually, about 3 or 4 years after I turned around the company, other companies asked if I could coach them on how to fix their business or turn around their business. So I started a coaching and speaking company and did that on the side for all these years until now. But first it was that I didn't know who to trust. When something like this happens, we've got competition chomping. And, I'm already struggling emotionally to keep everything together from day to day. And, talk in a small town happens quickly sometimes. And so like if someone saw me break down and cry, I was concerned about reputation management that way and capability to run a company and actually do this. So it took me a while, and I was very private at first of who are these people? I didn't even know who most of our vendors were and had only met a few. And so I'm trying to figure out who's on my side and who's against me. And actually about 6 months in, I, realized my level of defensiveness likely needed to go down so that I could receive help a little bit. And so we did have a banker that was, they were concerned because they carried our debt. And I also had an amazing accountant that I met with very often. And when you're meeting with your accountant often, you know your business is in a state of peril. And actually, once I could afford it, I did hire a business coach, and I also joined a peer group of other business owners. And until the time I sold, I had both. And I feel like those two avenues were the best thing I ever did, which is why I do them now.
Yeah, nice. Hey, I'm curious, go back 20 years here, when you first sort of took over, thereabouts. I imagine this space would have been quite male dominated in the past. So, and here you are, you don't have your husband by your side. Was that ever an issue for you? Do you ever feel like people kind of, I don't want to say took advantage, but maybe thought they could kind of, I don't know, treat you differently or treat your business differently, or I don't know, because you were a woman who was doing this on her own?
Yes to all of that, Simon. Yes. And there were many people who believed in what I could do or gave me a chance, is how I saw it, because a lot of customers could have left us, and and my employees, even some of them really stuck through and, wanted to make this work and felt the same passion that I did. And it got better with time, Simon. However, I'm not sure that ever went away. And where I remember my first meeting with our large vendor company. And again, some of these people were very good and very helpful. A lot of them didn't want me to play in the proverbial sandbox with them. And, so the first meeting that I ever went to, I opened the door and it was myself and about 50 men sitting in the room.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, what have I gotten myself into? And at the same time, I'm like, well, go sit down, because here you are. And this is what you're doing now. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
And so I think, we can tell stories, Simon, of, poor me and victimhood and all of that. And I likely did some of that myself. And the fact was, I felt like I had to work to prove myself. and likely work double or triple as hard as the next person. More because of my, I don't know. I think there was a male female factor in there, definitely, and not so much today, but it still exists. And over time, I decided I am different. I'm not a man in this traditional industry. Many men were and are great. Some were not. Some never did business with me because I was different. And I just thought, I can't be mad at all of them. So instead of being defensive and disgruntled, we'll just do good work. Let's just work with people that want to work with us. And so that kind of became my motto, but it was hard to go against that, the flow of the river there.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. I mean, and once again, it's not like you're just dealing with that in isolation. You're dealing with it in the context of loss and grief and all these other things, and probably wondering why this has happened to you. And I can imagine it would have been a really challenging time. Although having said that, you do strike me as the kind of, I'm just going to roll my sleeves up and get on with it kind of person. So I imagine that it sounds like that's what you did, and you've obviously come out the other side. So I'm always fascinated with how hardship and difficulty galvanizes the entrepreneur and makes them far more successful in the end than possibly they would have been if they didn't have a bit of hardship. I
agree, Simon. We did not have a life insurance policy to cover the debt of the new company because he was already diagnosed with leukemia when we got married 15 months earlier. And so it was the perfect storm. And I would bet money that had I had a huge life insurance policy to cover this debt and I got out, or I stayed in and had the life insurance policy, I would not have learned what I needed to the very hard way. Right out of the gate, I was crunching numbers and I was moving feed and I was running forklifts and unloading semis. So I learned every element of the business. And I'd have never done that had we, had this cushion of the financial picture being solid. So my life probably would have turned out much different. And I agree, in every entrepreneur success story, there's usually a huge tragedy or circumstance that takes you down, but luckily not out.
Yeah, for sure. So you've owned this business for 18 years. Talk to me a little bit about what did the journey look like? So you mentioned before you kind of got out of the red, you get your head above water again. Where in your journey did that sort of happen, and where did you take it from there?
Yeah, so it was about a year and a half after my late husband Randy's death that we were able to at least get to break even and a little bit above. And that was a big feat because, the talk around town that I would hear is that this lady will never make it. What's she doing? It was good local gossip for sure. And so that was at about the year and a half mark. And then we just kind of kept chipping away at it. And I think when you go through a huge challenge like that, you really gauge how bad it can get by that sort of tragedy. And so some of this business stuff, I would never say that I felt like, well, we've arrived, we've made it, so we continued to grow the company and always had this dynamic mind, a little bit of like, how could we do it different? How do we stand out as this small player in this big agribusiness commercialized market, against the big players? And that became more and more challenging over the years, and the cliche of pivoting your business. We did that several times. And, towards the end, it needed to happen quicker and quicker. And so competing against those big players became more difficult of where do we own space. And we realized fairly early on that the people part is what we could do the best. And we would just rely heavily on vendors and other professionals in the industry to come alongside us and build our dynamic that way. So yes, there were many wins, and I never remember feeling safe. Like someone asked me once in a different interview, when did you feel like you arrived? And this was maybe 16 years into the 18-year path. And I said, I still don't feel that way. Where when did you figure out that you knew what you were doing? Well, I never felt that way. Things change too fast. And I think it's a danger and a red flag when we get confident and maybe a little bit too arrogant and thinking, oh, I've got this business figured out and let's just coast. So it was always flipping to the next thing. So it was an evolution over time of slow and steady wins the race sometimes.
Yeah, look, indeed. It's one thing, and I sense this in you too, Sandy, is that business owners who've been on a journey, it doesn't, being on that journey and having that experience doesn't give you necessarily the ability to predict the future and therefore, as you say, coast or be comfortable with the world. I actually think it's just being more comfortable with change, and they understand, entrepreneurs and business owners get it. Change is constant, and the only thing you can really hope for is that you've got enough experience to be comfortable making decisions as you go. Be comfortable with the uncomfortableness of it, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I think it's fascinating to think about every step of our lives on that journey. And I really feel like the previous experience you just had sets the stage and gives you the qualifications and the capacity to handle what's presented to you at the time. And we may not feel that way, but I remember my first boss. I worked for a nonprofit development corporation, and it was herself, and it was kind of a startup. It was herself, and then I came in as the intern. And then she hired me as the program manager. And she said, we don't have staff, so you're going to go lead advisory committee meetings at the age of 21, right out of college, of all of these government officials in our region. And that scared me a lot. And however, her pushing me, because it's you, there's nobody else. So it's going to be you. It's myself and you, and you're it for this. And I remember thinking back then, like my first boss, Pauline, she really trained me to have that figure out ability, or whatever you want to call it. And it's, you just figured out one decision at a time, and hopefully realize when you've made a mistake quickly so that you can, swallow your pride and go a different direction quickly too.
Yeah, absolutely. Learn from it, right? Implement the change. Keep moving, keep iterating.
Yes.
I think it's it's interesting. I had another guest on this morning, and we were talking about, certainly one of my beliefs is that in 99% of cases, if you haven't had a few sleepless nights as a business owner, you probably haven't been in business. And so that ability to iterate and change and accept that nothing is perfect, but you're just going to make the best decision you can with the information at hand. I mean, that mindset, I think, is actually critical to long-term survival.
Yes, absolutely. And the one thing that I really focused on, Simon, was the fact that I never wanted my staff to ever experience what I did, meaning something happens to the owner and they're just stuck and didn't know all the information or didn't have the right processes in place. So I really trained my staff to lead and be, eventually my goal was, if something happened to me, I could just get plucked out and they would be able to go on without, there's always a little bit of a glitch, but to go on fairly successfully without me. And so that was my goal. And it ended up working beautifully at the time of exit, because I ended up not having an earnout period. However, it doesn't feel good to be plucked out either and just be done, somewhat just on the pride and ego side of it. So yes, I set it up so that we would kind of have a better environment of processes to fall back on, or cross training, even in a small company. So Yeah, my
Brilliant.
main goal is
Brilliant.
more I want to protect them.
Yeah. No, and I think putting other people first and saying that they're important and what they mean to me is important gives you I think a different perspective than I think somebody who just wants to cut and run and make the money and don't get me wrong, making money, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think we're all in business to make money, but yeah, I think it's interesting seeing what really drives behavior when you get to the pointy end of doing a deal. So certainly one of the things I'm always encouraging my clients is to think about that before we're in a deal, because the last thing you want is right when you're trying to close out that suddenly you have this epiphany that all these other issues are really important to you and you've never taken the time to consider it.
Right.
Uh, so that interesting. You've opened this up. So let's change gear here a little bit, because I'm interested in, you're running this business. You've obviously got it to a point. It's now performing, doing good things. You've got good staff. I mean, even though, you just said before, you don't feel like you've got all the answers, you must still be feeling better about business. At what point on that journey did you start thinking about exiting again?
Good question. I don't remember exactly, if it was year 10 or year 12 or whatever. I could sense that, well, number one, when I started, my late husband and I had made a pact that if someone would ask us to share our story, we made this pact in the hospital when he was still alive, that we would. And thus I started speaking almost right after he passed away, because people would ask me to share the story. So that's how I started my speaking and coaching and consulting business, was somebody asked. So I said yes. And then you go home and you put a proposal together, or figure out how to do a proposal even. So, so I think, that I always was doing that on the side. And, I think as an entrepreneur, you're always itching for what else is out there and you're watching it and so on. And I think the reason why I had this moonlighting business at the time doing coaching and consulting is I wanted to make sure I didn't have all of my, proverbial eggs in one basket. And so I think it was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. I remember thinking, man, this industry is going to start changing really fast. How long will we be able to sustain at a smaller company level? How long do I want to do this? And, there were times, a few times in there that I asked my staff if, what their intention was. Is anyone interested? Just this would be like in reviews or whatever. Do you want to own the company or work towards that? And they were fine. So I did do that. And I kind of just put feelers out every now and then of, would XYZ company or vendor be interested? And kind of hit walls with that mostly, but it gave me a really good base over time of what's my business worth and what is my business not worth, and being pretty realistic about it. And it also gave me chutzpah to think about what would make my business, where we're just kind of a reseller of products, what would make my business interesting and exciting enough for someone to want to come and purchase. Because most businesses in our space, I should say, they just closed shop. They just said, we're done. We're going to take accounts receivable and sell inventory. And every competitor, every retail agribusiness dealer around them would just take, they would just assume the customers. So there was really not a huge chance of selling, because you just close and everybody just divides and conquers with the available business that we had. And so over time, I was kind of thinking about this, but I think you also know when you're thinking enough about other things, where it's like, is my passion shifting? So I was fairly self-aware in that process. And I loved my business. I loved my staff. I loved the community. And a lot of me was like, but what could I find better than this? Because this is pretty cool what we've got here. And then, even outside, I would get outside influence from friends, family, colleagues of, why would you want to do anything with this? It's good and you built it up and you should be proud. But me, the entrepreneurial minded person, is, well, what else could I do? If I didn't
Yeah.
do this, or if I had more time, what else could I do? And so that was always in the back of my mind, and a lot because how I started was it just kind of fell upon me to take it over. And what would life be if I didn't have that dynamic? So
Yeah.
it was all good. It was like good banter for thinking. So I kind of processed it all, tried some, hit the walls all the time, and had to figure out how to make it more valuable so that it could sell.
Yeah. It sounds like it was an iterative process over time, and that makes a lot of sense. Um, so how did you go about selling, and how did you find your buyer?
Well, interestingly, we had a meeting with my two key staff and then the facilitator. I hired a facilitator to do a strategic planning session. And this was maybe 3 years prior to our sale. And I could tell I was on zero. I was on burnout, a lot of where entrepreneurs and leaders are now. And when you realize that, I think it's very good to, you either need to change it quickly or you need to make a move, because when you lose your passion for doing something, your business really starts suffering quickly. And people can notice that to your employees and so on. And so I had primed our facilitator of like, I don't know if we should get out while we're on top, get out meaning let's just sell inventory. I didn't have debt for most of those years. So I would be just fine to walk away and close the doors. And so, we had something good going, and I could see that we would really need to change something because we were getting pressure. One of our vendors was our main supplier, and I felt like that was a little bit too much control that they could perceivably have over us. So we would need to change that up. And so we had this meeting of Sandy's on burnout. Are you guys in? I have some ideas of how we can build a dynamic to our company so that we can be more autonomous, or should we quit now while the quitting is good? And so we had that meeting, and we all three decided that no, we want to try some of these new ideas. It's going to be tricky. It's going to be hard work, but we're in. And I needed their buy-in in order to keep going. So at that time, we doubled down. Like I wasn't actually even thinking of a sale that time. We used what we had built on one company to actually develop a new brand. And it was animal feed with essential oils in the mix. And because I was seeing how the world of business, or the world of agribusiness, and how animals were being fed was likely going to follow the human pursuits of natural health. And that's exactly what happened. And so my ideas in my own mind came before I saw products on the market like that. And now it's interesting and fascinating to see how many other companies and the big players too are coming out with these really amazing and much more healthy alternatives to the traditional ways that we fed animals. That it's mind blowing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And hindsight is 2020, but I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? You can see that it's going. I mean, it starts probably with domesticated, pets and dogs and cats, and treated like a family member too. Well, actually, If it's good for them, why wouldn't it be good for animals that fundamentally make our income? So yeah, it does seem very obvious now that you've said it.
It wasn't at the time. People thought I was a little nuts, and what happened was we ended up developing a whole brand. I thought my idea was we're going to go after, instead of the farm market that was really struggling and didn't have profits at the time, it was mostly beef and dairy that we were in. I'm like, we're going to go after the urban backyard chicken market, the pet chicken market, because those people have money. Or they have income to spend, and these are pets. They're not, commodities or whatever. And I'm going to sell chicken feed with essential oils to these people. And that will be a great dynamic for our traditional farm side. And so it developed from chicken feed into rabbit feed and goat feed and, calf feed and dairy feed and all of this. So we had actually built that brand as our own autonomous brand. And we still liked working with our vendors. So we had to keep those relationships while we built something that basically was competition for them a little bit, but we wanted to have control of our own future more. So
it makes a lot of sense. And builds value. So who did you eventually sell to?
Yeah, so we eventually sold to our largest vendor, and we had great relationships with them all along. And in earlier in 2020, I sold in December of 2020. Earlier in 2020, their broker came to me and said, "Have you ever thought of exiting?" And actually, since day one, I always believed that a business should be for sale. Yeah. That we should never be so tied to it that we can't walk away for the right price. We should always have that walkaway price. And so I always thought I should build this business to sell it, and didn't really have a context for it, but I just thought that was a good way to do that. And then, since then I'm a constant learner and podcast listener. So now, and back then it was a lot of books of how do you build this business to sell it then or grow it. And so then our vendor broker came to me and said, "Would you ever consider a conversation and selling?" And so I said, "I will always entertain a conversation." And so that's when the talks, and that was only maybe 6 months before the deal went through. So
cool.
Yes.
Cool. And so just give us a sense of what was the business turning over by the time you actually sold it?
So at the high, we were really probably about the 8 million mark. So we had grown it. We were right about the 1 million mark when I started. So we grew, slowly and gradually. And at the end, we were so what was happening was there was so many horrible years in the dairy and beef side that many of our customers quit farming. So we were experiencing attrition just because a lot of our great customers just were selling off all of their animals and going to get a job in town where they could actually make money. And then competition was more solid too. And so there was a lot of side, threatening things that could happen to our business. So at the end, we were probably right around the 5 million mark because some of the bigger farms that we had started going direct to the vendor and things like that. So we could have pivoted once more and gone into the hobby market. There's a lot of great businesses out there that are making great money doing that and serving that pet and small farm market. So so that was about the size we were at the time.
Yeah, cool. And when you thought about the value of your business, were you using a typical kind of multiple of EBITDA, or what was the method you used to come up with a number for yourself?
Yeah, so we were taking the profits from Egg Venture, the traditional company, and using it to build out this new brand, the New Heritage Feed Company. And so I actually had taken selling off the table for a few years because our profits didn't look as good as they usually would. And so I'm like, well, we're either going to double down and stay in this for a while and hopefully see the profits soar again. And what happened was actually one of the things that I had done all along was I would make an adjusted, I always called it my adjusted income statement at the end of the year, where I would just export into an Excel spreadsheet and add back in any additional expenses that we had during the year so that I could get to a closer number of what would the business have actually done had we not spent extra or used the profits to build this other company. And so I had those adjusted income statements for many years. And And that really helped because we could take a look at the actual picture versus, or what could have been the picture versus the actual picture. And actually, I mean, I have always believed in continuing ed, and, negotiations and how we position ourselves is key. And I'm not saying I had it all mastered, but I did know that even if I thought this would be a great time to sell, my message was very honest of, I don't think it's a good time for me to sell. Our numbers don't look good because I'm using our profits to build this other company now, or this other brand. And so this just really isn't even a good time to look at our numbers, because the multiple of EBITDA would have been pretty low. So, and I also, I always was a learner. So I always kind of knew what multiples I'd likely get. And they weren't like a tech firm that gets the many, many multiples. It was 4, 5, 6 times EBITDA or something like that. So
yeah.
Okay. Pretty self-aware.
Yeah. And look, and that process you've described there is very common, right? I mean, exit advisory, we help people sell all the time, and there is always a process of normalizing the numbers, adjusting the EBITDA. It's always a multiple of adjusted EBITDA, not just the straight EBITDA, right?
Yes, so absolutely.
And we come across the occasional clients of ours who have very, very clean businesses, and they have no ad backs. I've had clients with no ad backs, and I think, well, that's wonderful. But most business owners run their business to make the best use of that kind of corporate structure and tax benefits and whatever, which is logical. So okay, so that's interesting. So somewhere around that sort of 4 to 6 EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA is where businesses like yours generally sell.
Yes, that's what was in my mind, at least. And, obviously in the negotiations phase, and most people are aware of this, is what the owner wants and what the buying entity wants are usually different numbers, and that will be tested. There'll be low offers and no's along the way. And then you finally get to something that is acceptable for both.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's always if there's no middle ground, right, then there's no deal. So there's, somewhere we've got to find a place to meet. But no, that's interesting. And typically I find with transactions, the business owner gets remunerated, typically in 3 buckets, right? There's maybe cash up front, there can be a deferred component that's not at risk, and then there can be an earn out. I've seen deals go in just one of those buckets, all of those buckets, combinations and everything else. But what broadly speaking, without going into confidential stuff, but just did you have an earn out? What sort of structure did you end up with?
Yes, good question, Simon. So because I had always worked with this vendor, so I knew their management. I knew most of their sales staff that was working with us, and we knew the dynamics of the company because we worked with them very closely as partners on the farm. So that made that a lot easier. And when they came to me, I said, I will entertain this. Here's what I am asking. We need this to be friendly. We need this to go quickly, because this was my late husband's company. So, emotionally, it was a little bit taxing, obviously. And there's no reason that this can't, go quickly. And the other thing was, there was 2 other things. I would like you to treat my employees well. Like, that's very important to me. Or the employees, I always say mine, because you feel like I don't know, have some piece of their life or something. But I just really valued my employees, and I wanted to make sure they were taken care of. And then please don't tell me what you're going to do with our company after you buy, if this goes through, because, we were the retailer, and they likely, even for us, we did a lot of our work by delivering. So the need for an actual location, I knew wasn't that great, and they'd likely close our nice location in this nice rural community. And that is what happened. But I didn't want that spelled out for me. So it was too heartbreaking. Yes.
Yeah. And I think you might have mentioned actually in the beginning of our chat that I don't think you had an earn out. Is that right? Or have I misheard
Oh,
that?
yes. Yes. Part two of that. So they came to me, we had decided on a price, and actually I had split out New Heritage Feeds, the company with essential oils, into a separate S Corp before that. So that wasn't involved in the sale. They wanted our traditional business. And so that was where most of the negotiating points landed, because I said, well, if you're going to shackle my ankles with not being able to do my new company, then it makes more sense for me to keep all of it. Because I knew that by selling, I would be disrupting my new company too, because we were selling a lot of product out of our own location. And so when we did finally get to the number and get to the closing date and so on, the day that we closed was the day I was finished. Wow. And that was great. And I think a lot of owners, it works great because we're used to being the boss and the leader. And we really need to take a second seat to stay for a year or two or however long. And so, we have seen it work successfully, obviously, where people stay in long-term as the president or whatever too. For me, I just think I was too heartfelt and tied to it that it would have been really hard to be managed by someone else. But they didn't want me to stay either. And they actually said, Sandy, no offense, but when we close this deal, we don't need you anymore. And
okay.
So Friday we close, Monday I sit at home.
Wow.
So yes, that was it was a different feeling for sure.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, look, I think that's actually the dream for a lot of business owners. They want to be able to make a clean break like that. And what is often a concern, I guess, is business owners sometimes having no earnout can obviously impact the valuation that they get offered or the price they get offered. And so I have actually seen clients take the lower of various offers purely because the terms around earnouts and being able to exit quicker were more favorable.
Right.
So, but by the sounds of your story, perhaps that wasn't such an issue and it wasn't going to impact value. It just, you guys had already, you got to your price and it just suited everyone.
Yes. Well, and the price was obviously lower than what I would have dreamed. And so the deal that we made was, it was a straight sale. They bought everything, the buildings and everything, inventory, equipment, all of that. And so all I had to do was pack up my office, which made it even easier on me than having to liquidate anything or whatever. And so my concern in the deal process was, we're finally having fun again. We went through a few not so fun years of lower profits and losing farms. And now we discovered this new feed that's working and we're finally getting some synergy off of it. So I think there's more upside than what's being presented here as an offer for me. So I might just stick it out. And so what happened was it was a straight sale and where I exited, and I kind of figured that they'd be able to keep a lot of our customers because we had a great relationship with them as a team. And so I get a commission check basically for a few years, nothing that's a windfall or anything, but a little bit to pay back for all of what we built back up where I couldn't capitalize on at the time of the sale. So, and they're doing great. They're doing great as a company. My employees got hired by that company and they're doing great. And I'm happy for all of them. And I miss the people part. Definitely. Yeah. I'm proud of how they all landed.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you've moved from here. You've now got the New Heritage Feed Company. You're doing coaching and speaking and all this wonderful stuff. I noticed that you sit on the board of directors for St. Cloud State University as well. How do you spread your time out now? What gets you most of your focus?
Yes. Well, so at the time for the New Heritage side, I'd lost my team because the team went with them. And I also I knew this ahead of time, I would be disrupting my own new company because a lot of the sales were sitting at that retail location. And I just thought, well, we'll be an e-commerce, distribution type model instead of like the retail model anyway. So I'll just build it back. And what I ended up doing with that company was putting it on hold, kind of like putting it on pause. I'm like, this is basically a startup all over again because I lost my resources basically. And so I kept the company going, and I thought, well, if I can find a strategic partner that wants to plant a team and work with me, I've got a lot of the baseline built, but I basically put it on pause for most until about a month or two ago, actually, where we kept retailers going that were ordering and reordering and so on all this time. But, as far as any big pushes, I'm like, I can't do this by myself, nor do I want to this time. And so we're slowly ramping that back up. But my role this time is founder, visionary. It's not going to be the day-to-day person once we're out of this test phase and so on. So that's still happening. I'm pretty excited about it because we've got some new products in the mix that I think will, just in the natural food and plant-based animal feed space that are pretty exciting. So the strategic partner that we're testing has put together a test phase of let's just try to do something with this, and it's kind of fun. So I got that, and then I actually ended up picking up well, now I have space and time, so I facilitate a peer group of other business owners and CEOs, and I love that. I did that previously too, and my whole thing is I want entrepreneurship to be a lot more lucrative, a lot more fun, come with a lot more ease than some of the struggles that I went through. So I do have one-on-one clients that I help with leadership teams and evolving a company's dynamics, which is pretty hot right now, obviously. I have one-on-one clients that own companies or that are high-level leaders in companies. And so then I've got the group that I facilitate, and then I do some speaking too. So it's,
keeps you busy.
I'm loving it all. And I miss what we had, but I'm loving it all. And some of it is just stepping into the new, even when, you're longing. I think you do go through a dark night of the soul after you sell your company of, I didn't think it was going to happen this way. Or, when you're done, it's amazing. I mean, everyone moves on, including me. And it's like, you're used to all these dynamics and hundreds of people surrounding you every day in this dynamic business. And then boom, you're by yourself. That's a lot of thinking time. So
indeed,
yes, because I already had coaching clients and peer groups that I facilitated and speaking. So I made sure of that ahead of time. I knew I wasn't one to just rip the Band-Aid and do nothing for a while, but I do like to have more time freedom than the previous hard drive I was always on.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Sandy, I could probably talk to you about this sort of stuff all day. I'd like to put you on the spot in the moment and ask if there is one piece of advice that you would like to share with other entrepreneurs who are on their journey and perhaps not ready to exit yet, but heading that direction. But before I do that, are you happy for people to reach out and connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. Again, my goal is to make everyone else's path easier, to help them dream larger, and to have it be successful. And so yes, my email is sandy@sandyhansen-wolff.com. My website is under the same. It's sandyhansen-wolff.com. And yes, we are all. I mean, we're all in. There's so much to do in this world for the good of all, and happy to be a part of somebody's journey. And this is my passion work that I get to do. That business was my passion work, and this is my passion work that I get to live every day. And I'm just so lucky.
No, that's awesome. Well, look, we'll put links to your website and certainly your LinkedIn page on in the show notes. For
Yes.
those reaching out on LinkedIn and connecting, please, maybe just put a little note there for Sandy, letting her know that you heard her being interviewed on the podcast, so she knows where you're coming from and why
Yes.
you're perhaps reaching out would be nice. But yeah, look, that's great. I'm really happy to be sharing this and pointing people in that direction.
Thank
And
you.
and Sandy, before we finish, is there the one tip, a parting gift, I guess, that you can share with your fellow entrepreneurs?
Yes. First of all, listen. When we listen, some of those answers are being told to us, and sometimes we're so stubborn that we're not listening to people that are trying to help us. And if I had one solid piece of advice for any entrepreneur or high-level leader, I tell this to all client prospects that I have. Every leader and business owner should have a peer group, and they should have a business coach. And I always tell them, if I am not a match, go find someone that is, because you need those trusted confidants. And once I had that in place, my level of learning increased tenfold. You had your private board of advisors, and some of the best friends I'll ever have met came out of those groups and out of, so get a coach, get a peer group. If not me, someone else. It's the best things I ever did to move the needle the quickest.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, if it's having a coach is good enough for the world's greatest athletes, I mean, you'd think if anybody knows how to do it, an elite athlete knows how to do their bit, their sport well, but they still have coaches, right? So
yes,
absolutely, the best people have support and
Yes.
have advisors and have
Yes.
coaches. So
Yes.
great advice. Sandy, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time and thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you, Simon. It's a humble privilege whenever I'm asked to do a podcast, and it's just a joy to have been able to chat with you today. Thanks so much, Simon.
Well, it's very much our pleasure as well.